Okay, so we have talked about how to modify the geometry at the vertex level using our sculpting brushes here, but we can actually work on the entire subtool as a unit. And to do that, we need to tap either the W, the E, or the R key, and it'll bring up our Gizmo3D. The Gizmo3D is kind of a combination of what you might expect in another 3D application with move, rotate, and scale kind of all in one tool. And if you are familiar with any other 3D applications, this will look vaguely familiar, hopefully. If you want to move along an axis, you can go ahead and grab one of the axes here and it'll snap your movement. You can rotate, same deal. And if you hold the Shift key, it will actually give you a snap there, which you can modify somewhere, maybe in here, I can't remember. But anyway, it is possible to modify that. If you want to move or rotate according to the camera position, like if I'm kind of over here, and I want to move this thing around or rotate it, I can do so. And it's disconnected from the world axes. But you can see our Gizmo3D comes along, right? So whatever we're doing here, whatever the orientation of our geo is, unless we freeze this rotation, the Gizmo will follow along. So that's kind of a convenient feature. If we did want to reset the rotation on this object, we can just click this little icon here, which is going to be reset mesh orientation. See, it goes right back. And you can do all that same stuff here with the pivot. So if I wanted to modify the orientation of the pivot, all I need to do is hold the Alt key down, and you can see this little lock icon becomes unlocked, and then I can play with the orientation and the position of the pivot, and it will not modify the geometry until I release the Alt key, and then whatever I've done to my pivot would potentially be applied to any transformations that I might make to my geometry. So if I want to reset the rotation of the Gizmo3D, as you might have guessed, you just hold the Alt key and click on that little circle thing there. So to review what this is doing, if there is a rotation on the geometry and I want to get rid of it, I can just click this button. If there is a rotation on the pivot and I want to get rid of it, I just have to, well, the rotation you would get by holding Alt. So you just hold Alt and then click on the little reset orientation icon there and it'll reset it. So if I wanted to set the pivot back to the origin, like the world origin, you just click this little home icon. Now if this thing is moved someplace and I want to move the geometry, I'm not holding Alt here, I'm just clicking the home icon and it'll move it back. So Alt modifies the pivot, and without Alt, you will modify the geometry. And in this case, by modifying, I mean you'll just take it back home, or you'll reset the orientations so that it's all zeroed out. And it looks like, let's see if I was expecting this to kind of pop back in here, but that will sort of take us to what this is going to do. So this is going to go to the unmasked mesh center. So whatever if I mask some of this, then it'll calculate the center of the unmasked area. So with nothing masked, if I click it, it's going to operate on just the gizmo here, and it's going to place it at the center of my unmasked area, which is going to be right there. So now once the pivot is centered in the geometry, if I hit home, it's going to take the geometry back home. Hopefully that all makes sense. So if I mask a little part of it and hit this guy, it's going to move the pivot to the center of the unmasked area, right? So on and so forth. So you can easily reset this by unmasking everything and then clicking the little map icon here. So if you want to orient the movement, right? Like right now we're kind of snapped to the world grid because of the orientation of the pivot. I'm going to just rotate my geometry and give it a little bit of a scale this way. And now I'm going to actually get rid of my understanding of the orientation of this by resetting my pivot, right? So now if I wanted to, say, make that scale shorter or whatever, and I need to orient my pivot along these edges. So the very simple way to do that is you just hold Control and then you click on a vert. Sorry, not Control, it's going to be Alt, and you click on a vert. And any other vert that I click on, it is going to basically point at. So long as I'm pointing to any vert on that same edge, it's going to orient along that edge very conveniently. So that's really useful for a lot of anything that you might be doing on the poly modeling front, like low poly box modeling type stuff with ZModeler. It's very nice to be able to move things directly along an edge and a specific edge in your geometry. So as you saw a minute ago, if you hold Alt, it's going to give you some like masking stuff. I don't really use that too much because the masking brushes are pretty nice, but you do have access to it if you wanted to go ahead and try to mask your geometry in a way that was useful. And if I wanted to reset the orientation of this, I can just make sure that my pivot is pointing towards or pointing along one of these edges here, and then I probably can just tap that and it'll go ahead and write it up. So that is the sort of core functionality of the Gizmo3D. It has some additional stuff here, which is kind of interesting. Well, first of all, I'll show you what this does. So typically, you can really only work on one subtool at a time, but occasionally you'll need to move things as a group. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll just duplicate this subtool and make a few of them. So now I've got these 3 subtools. If I wanted to move them all as a group, all I need to do is click this little icon here. And now they will all be acted upon. Now, if I grab one of the subtools and mask it out, it's going to be ignored. So the masking still works with this multiple subtool thing. And in fact, let me see if this might work as well. Yeah, so just FYI, if you mask something out, this is going to act on anything that isn't masked. So, and then also if you turn off the visibility, it's not going to be modified. So it's only functional on visible subtools that are unmasked. But it's very useful for all kinds of things. So let's see, we'll go ahead and tap solo. I don't think I'm going to need those again, but I might. I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit longer, and we can talk very briefly about this stuff. I don't use it very often, so I'm not great at it, but it's basically a bunch of deformers. And they've got, you can see there's lots of options here, but I'll just use like bend arc. And the way it works is you grab these little whatever they are, there we go. And one of them is going to do something cool. And, it's usually just a matter of experimentation. For me, again, because I really know how this stuff works. But it is occasionally useful, like if you've got to make a very consistent deformation for something. And then you can see I get this little, like there's my bend arc, right? So if I wanted to keep it editable, I can just leave it here. But if I want to get rid of it, I think I can hit the Gizmo3D. Now there's some other way to do it. Go to bend arc, and then I think there's probably like delete. Right, so the bend arc now is a deformer that lives on the subtool, that's my guess. And if you wanted to accept it, it'll go away. And now that's our geometry and it's baked in. I don't know if that's undoable. It looks like it's undoable, or I can delete it and it'll go back to normal. So anyway, there's where some deformers live. You could also get some deformations that are a little bit more difficult to control down here. Like, let's see, we've got our bend, whatever. It's just kind of doing that bend operation in a much more inarticulate way that is not quite as sensitive to what the geometry is, how it's oriented and shaped and all that stuff. So anyway, that is a quick rundown of the Gizmo3D tool. There's an older version of this tool, if you ever see any of my old tutorials, that you will definitely see me using, called the transpose tool. And it's effectively the same thing. It's got a few different features that are probably not really worth covering, but if they are, I guess maybe I'll make another video to talk about that stuff, because I think we're about out of time here. So your best practices is definitely going to be to just get used to using the Gizmo3D. And the way that you toggle between the two, if I didn't mention it earlier, is with the Y key. So this is going to be the default, and it's got pretty much all the functionality for transforming your geometry that you're going to need.